Okay. We're rolling.
All right. Well, my name is James Pepper. I'm the chair of the Vermont Cannabis Control Board. Today is April 18th, 2022. It's 11:01, and I call this meeting to order. So just a few brief remarks. Reminder from last week. Talking to fire safety is a requirement for all licensees. This is not meant to be overly burdensome, and in fact, fire safety doesn't have jurisdiction over every license type. Fire safety has jurisdiction over public buildings, and there is a definition of a public building in statute. And a reminder that the CCB cannot waive fire safety's jurisdiction. And so we're going to request some indication that you have spoken to fire safety, regardless of what license type you're seeking. Fire safety is prepared for these conversations. They can do a very quick check remotely to see if your building is under their jurisdiction. And so they've divided up the state between north and south and have assigned 2 people to do these checks. And if they do have jurisdiction, to kind of schedule follow-up. Landon Wheeler handles the southern part of the state. His email address is landon.wheeler@vermont.gov. His phone number is 802-216-0501. Ben Moffitt handles the northern parts of the state. His email is benjamin.moffitt, MOFFATT, @vermont.gov. And his phone number is 802-479-7581. And again, they can do a very quick check. They'll send you a form letter if you're not subject to their jurisdiction. And even if you are subject to their jurisdiction, their process is not so onerous that you can't get through it relatively quickly. For tax compliance, the board is going to require a certificate of good standing from the tax department. This is spelled out in our rules, but in order to get one of these, you can do this remotely as well. You don't have to go to the tax department, but you can email tax.compliancesupport@vermont.gov. And, they just gave us a few tips. The subject line for that email should indicate it's a good standing request for a cannabis license. And within the email, you should include the name of your business and either your social security number or a federal employee identification number. Let's see, the tax department is working on a comprehensive guidance document specific to cannabis businesses. That should be up on their website. They have some good information on their website currently, but that kind of specific to cannabis businesses guidance document should be up on their website this week. I know the draft is done. They're just polishing it off right now. That will have a very kind of detailed step-by-step instructions on how to not just get this good standing check, which is very straightforward, but also how to register with them for kind of sales and use tax compliance and excise tax compliance. Update on pre-qualification. Just before I do that, a reminder, pre-qualification is not a prerequisite for an operating license. It's a voluntary process. It's primarily aimed at clearing people that might have a criminal conviction in their past that might prevent them from ultimately getting a license. There's some secondary benefits for folks that are seeking a bank account or an insurance account, or trying to talk to certain government agencies. But it might not be right for you. It does include a $500 non-refundable credit towards your application. It's a fee that you have to pay, but it will get credited towards your future license. So everyone should decide whether pre-qualification is right for them. But the numbers from this week, updated numbers as of this morning, there have been 643 total applications submitted. Of those, though, I should note that 371 are incomplete in some form or another. Either the required documents have not been uploaded or the fee has not been paid. So we are going to continue to review those today and approve some today. But I just want to give you an update on that. And again, our first licensing window is open. It was opened on April 1st. As of this morning, we have 56 licenses that have been fully submitted. And again, we have not reviewed those for completeness, but they have been fully submitted. And if you have any questions about pre-qualification or your license, feel free to give us a call. We have a lot of good information on our website, which we would hope that you take a look at first if you have questions. But you can email us at ccb.info@vermont.gov or give us a call at 802-828-1010 and hit option 0 for the adult use program. Other than that, just need to approve our minutes from April 11th, last Monday. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Moving on to the agenda. The first item is we're going to discuss guidance for escrow or bond amounts for the cessation of operations. I prepared just a few very kind of brief slides for that. If you want to take a look. All right. Let's see what happens. All right. So just as a reminder, in Rule 1.4.4, we say that all applicants must submit a contingency and continuity plan that addresses the dispersal or disposal of inventory in the event of an abrupt closure. And then in 1.4.5, we require each applicant to submit documentation of a bond or escrow for cessation of operations of a cannabis establishment, cost to be determined by a board in guidance. And a reminder that we did waive 1.4.5B, this documentation of bond or escrow for tier 1 cultivators, but not the continuity plan. And essentially, I think, why we have this is, this is a controlled substance. It is federally illegal. And if a business has to abruptly shut, or if their license is revoked for some reason, we need to have some assurance that the product, the controlled substance, is not going to end up on the illicit market. A lot of states, I'd say the vast majority of them, require that anyone who's being licensed have a certain amount of assets. I think this is our kind of way around that. We know that, saying that every licensee needs to have, a minimum of $2 million in assets would be just an ultimate barrier for too many people. But that being said, if we do need to revoke a license or if a business fails, we need to have some assurance that the bill doesn't get passed on to the state or the cannabis board for ensuring proper disposal or destruction of this controlled substance. So Massachusetts has a very similar scheme laid out. This is from their rules. And again, it's just the requirement to have a bond or an escrow account with a certain amount of money in it that can be used for those four purposes that are laid out in sub A. And the amount that they require, they do also, by the way, have a minimum assets requirement for owning a license. I think you need to show that you have assets of a minimum of $500,000. But they also have this fee or this escrow amount, and they say it's either the amount of your license or it's $5,000. And then again, it can be used for the destruction of cannabis goods. It can be used for the cost of compensation for a corner appointee, cessation of operations, or whatever other use the commission may authorize or deem necessary.
Is that $5,000 no matter size, type of license?
They strongly suggest that it's and I have the wording in the guidance, I think, but they strongly suggest the amount of your license, but they're willing to consider 5,000 in the alternative.
Okay.
So this is from their guidance on this section. You can see that it's really set aside for either winding down or dismantling a marijuana establishment or a dispensary. It can be used for satisfying outstanding sales tax obligations, securing a licensee's facility in the event that they have to abruptly shut down, and the costs for destroying marijuana or marijuana products in the inventory. And then so it applies, the kind of fee amount is what they suggest, the licensing fee amount. Even if your license fee has been waived, just look at the underlying fee amount for your license, or at a minimum of $5,000. So that's what Massachusetts does. I'm not saying that we should follow them. Here are some things that some questions that I put forward to you guys, Julie and Kyle. So as we saw last week, that we are going to require, if you cannot get an insurance policy, that you set aside a certain amount of money in escrow to cover claims against your company. One of the questions that comes to mind is, if you have one of these insurance escrow accounts, do you need a separate insurance escrow account or a separate escrow account for cessation of operations, or can we combine the two? Second question, how much do we want to see for cessation of operations? Do we want it pegged to someone's license fee? Do we want some alternative amount like Massachusetts does that just applies universally to all licenses? Are we okay with just saying those amounts that you set aside for your insurance escrow could also be used for this, so we don't need an additional amount if you're going for an insurance escrow, or some other amount? Another one is, do we need this for testing facilities, which are largely not going to probably have a lot of cannabis on site? Maybe they are, but it seems to me that they're not cultivating. They have samples, and the samples are going to be secured. But just a question about whether this should apply to testing facilities. And then tier 1 manufacturers, and again, those are the home-based food processors, kind of the smallest level of manufacturers. And then should our waiver provision, our general waiver authority, come into play in determining how much someone might need to set aside for wind down costs? So those are just a few questions that I had. I talked internally with David and Bryn a little bit on this, and it seems to me that if someone is going to get an escrow account for insurance, that they should not also have to get a separate escrow account for wind down costs, that we can expand the scope of that escrow account the authority to spend that money and just include wind down costs. That being said, if someone gets an insurance policy and they should then have to have an escrow account for wind down costs in addition. So, so we should also, even if we decide that that amount would be sufficient, the amounts that we designated for the insurance alternative escrow, we still need to probably think about what we want for wind down costs in the event that someone gets an insurance policy and needs to set up one of these accounts separately. Okay.
So can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Oh, are you going to suggest some amounts, Pepper?
I did have some suggested amounts on the next slide.
Okay, I'll wait.
But do we want to, I guess, do we want to talk about whether testing facilities or these kind of tier one home-based provider or home-based manufacturers need, I mean, should we be treating tier one manufacturers the same way we treat tier one cultivators, essentially? Just recognizing that the scope of what they're doing is minimal. The potential impact is much less, and that a wind down cost might not make sense to set a specific amount for tier one manufacturers. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think it depends on what we set aside for amounts. Like if we were to say it's like a month's operational costs or something like that, then it probably could be the same across the board because it would vary based on size of business. But if we pick a blanket amount, we may want to adjust for tier one.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe similar questions. Maybe the next slide will show. But we thinking a blanket amount? Okay.
Yeah. So essentially, I took out testing labs, but we can obviously add them back in.
I think personally that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
So these are the categories that we used for our bond escrow amounts for insurance alternatives. So it's retailers, wholesalers, integrateds, tier 3 manufacturers, which is the ones that can use solvent-based extraction. The tier 4, 5, and 6 cultivators of any type. So that would be the general $5,000 set aside for cessation of operations. And then for tier 1 and 2 manufacturers, which could just be tier 2 manufacturers. And then the tier 2 and 3 cultivators, $2,500. So just half. And I don't know if that's the right amount or not. I just proposed something. And that's it. I mean, essentially, I'm open to any suggestions on this. I can show you, if you'd like, the amounts that you have to set aside for insurance. If you'd like to see that as well.
We said it was commercially reasonable insurance, and then was it $10,000, Pepper, for set aside?
I'll pull it up. I think that's what it was.
When I did this for insurance programs, for self-funded programs, we had to set aside a certain amount based on like 3 months worth of claims, for example. So if the business ceased operations, there would still be enough money to pay out a certain amount of claims. So when I was thinking about this morning, I was thinking about it very similarly, but in terms of like operational costs. I'm sensitive to requiring businesses to set aside too much in an escrow in early years because they're young businesses and they're going to want to reinvest as much money as possible in their business. So I just want to, those are the things I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And just so I remember, you said in Massachusetts it was equal to your license fee, and an alternative to that could be $5,000 if you show that you can't, meet that. Okay. And where you're proposing we don't tie it to licensing fees, we just use some blanket numbers depending on your tiering size.
We could. My numbers are generally going to be.
It seems like it's lower than
for the most part. It's lower. Yeah. I mean, this is what we did for insurance, and essentially what we would do here, if you were going to use an escrow account as an alternative to insurance, we would expand the scope of that escrow account to include kind of costs associated with cessation of operations. So you wouldn't have to get 2 escrow accounts.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so then the real question is, someone gets an insurance policy, they don't have one of these insurance escrow accounts. How much do we feel is necessary for a wind down cost? And again, you know, if you remember what we did for kind of destruction of a crop, you know, we made it pretty broad and relatively inexpensive.
A lot of options.
A lot of options. So maybe for cultivators, it doesn't need to be overly expensive. But, you know, depending on, I mean, if you're a retailer, for instance, you have to abruptly shut down. You know, you have to.
Those are where my concerns are a little bit.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I guess
I mean, I feel like
the question is, are these numbers too large? Are they not large enough? Is this the right breakdown in license types?
I think
guess
it's the right break. Oh, sorry, Kyle.
No, go ahead.
I think it's the right breakdown in license types. I think a sum of no less than 5,000 is probably all right. I'm thinking too, like if someone was really going to cease operations, like for manufacturers, they would have assets, right? So I'm not sure that, you know, 2,500 is probably okay if they're also going to sell their assets.
So then would you move tier 3 down? Tier 3 manufacturers?
No, because those are designed to be home-based businesses. Yes, I think I would. Yep.
Well, so the tier 3, just remember the legislature switched them. So tier 1 is home base.
Okay.
Tier 2 is kind of just, you know, non-solvent base extraction.
I'm still getting used to that switch too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Tier
Sorry.
3 is, yeah.
I mean, some of the manufacturers, depending on how they own certain pieces of equipment, they're going to cost way more than you know what's being held in here.
Right. Well, I used to have a slide, I took it off, about what we could consider for a waiver, and looking at someone's assets, you know, and their cessation and continuity plan at the time of licensure could certainly play into how much someone needs to actually set aside.
I think I'm comfortable with this. I think one thing based off one of your slides on questions is, do we want tier 1 to be subject to this, or do we think we can waive the requirement for tier 1 manufacturers?
Right.
I don't know, Julie, if you have any thoughts on that. Treating tier 1s here like we would a small cultivator.
Yes, I agree with that. I would like to be able to waive it for tier 1, especially if it's a pretty low asset.
So this would be.
Oh. Lost it for a second. That sunshine must be pulling her in. I think that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Well, then why don't we leave it like this? And if we find that this is unachievable for certain people, we can evaluate them on a case-by-case basis.
And we did also decide that if somebody instead of insurance is taking out an account and holding that in escrow, that 10 grand, they could just put this money into that account instead of having to do another account and pay more fees for that account.
Well, I actually think if you're establishing an escrow account for an alternative to an insurance policy, that those amounts that are in 2.2.2 that we just looked at would be sufficient for this as well.
Okay.
Not in addition.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yeah. Okay. So we will update our website with this information then as guidance on, you know, cessation costs. Okay. So next on the agenda is to vote to close the window for pre-qualification applications on May 31st. Again, we need to provide the industry, the public 30 days notice before we open or close any window, whether that's pre-qualification or licensure, general licensure. Really, I think the motivation behind this is it looks like we have kind of healthy numbers in all aspects of pre-qualification. If we close on May 31st, that lines us up with the opening of all of our license types, with the exception, I think, of retailers. And, you know, we as a board really need to start focusing on approving operating licenses. And so I think everyone has kind of a good grasp of the pre-qualification. And so I think we, do need to, it probably makes sense for us to close the pre-qualification licensing window at this point, or not at this point, but vote to close it on May 31st.
So I'll move that the board closes our pre-qualification window on May 31st, 2022.
Okay. I just, sorry.
Am I moving too fast?
No, that's all good. Any further discussion of that point?
I think that makes sense. There's a lot of people in the pre-qual window. Some are withdrawing in anticipation of full licensure.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the direction we need to move is our staff needs to be starting to focus more on the operating licenses full time.
All right. Julie, anything else there?
No, thank you though.
Okay. Then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. So we'll again update our website with that decision as well. Next, just a review of staff recommendations on pre-qualification applications. Bryn, are you with us for this?
Yep, I am.
Okay, I'll turn things over to you then.
Okay, sounds good. So rather than share my screen from here, I'm wondering if David might be willing to plug in and share our.
I gotcha.
Thank you. So before I start going through the pre-qualification application registry, I just want to give everyone a reminder that our staff is working to develop all of these systems for reviewing the pre-qualification applications. And also they're still working on consolidating the data that we are all going to need to track to identify where we are in the process. So this registry is really kind of a work in progress, and we will be able to report on more information, more data on where the applications are in the coming weeks. We still have really limited staff. Our positions for additional licensing staff are going to be posted in the next couple of days. So we're underway with bringing on our full team on board, and we're going to have more capacity to collect data and report data soon. So just a disclaimer here that this is really a work in progress, and it will contain more information as time goes on. So that, having said that, we have a number of pre-qualification applications to approve today. And again, just as with every week, these are applications that staff has reviewed and determined to be sufficient to meet the requirements contained in rules 1.4.1 and 1.4.2. And all of these applicants either have have a clear record check or have no presumptively disqualifying convictions on their record. So with that, I will go through the submissions that are recommended for the board to approve. So the first is submission number 30, and that is for mixed use tier 1. Next is submission number 336, again, a mixed use tier 1. Submission number 173, mixed use tier 1. Submission number 369 for mixed use tier 1. Submission number 251 for mixed use tier 1. Submission number 170 for mixed use tier 1. Submission number 256, tier 1 mixed use. Submission number 565, tier 1 mixed use. Submission number 158 for tier 1 mixed use. Submission number 114 for outdoor tier 1. Submission 81 for outdoor tier 1. Submission 227 for outdoor tier 1. And that is all we have for today. So we've got 9 mixed use cultivators, 6 outdoor cultivators, and 2 indoor for approval today.
All right. So is there a motion to approve these
Yep,
pre-qualification?
I move that the board accept each of the recommendations for pre-qualification approval as presented to us by staff in this meeting.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. All right. Yeah, I think that's it. So I closed my agenda by accident. But I think all we have left is public comment. I think you're right. I'll just pull it up quickly. Double check.
There's some lucky the street if we are wrong.
No, I think that's right. Okay. So we'll open up to public comment. We'll do it the way that we traditionally have, which is folks that have joined via the link, raise your virtual hand. Then we'll move to people that join via the phone. And again, you know, if you ask us questions, we can't necessarily respond directly during public comment period. We do collect questions and we try and update our FAQ document to reflect those questions that we receive. And, you know, you can always reach out to the board directly if you have a question. But for now, we'll open and it looks like start with Dave Silverman.
Good morning, everyone. 2 quick things. One is you mentioned the waivers. On my list of waive provisions, I do see 1.4.4a as being waived for Tier 1 cultivators, and I just wanted to see whether that's worth clarifying. I wanted to just briefly raise a potential issue that I saw in the Senate Judiciary amendment. I know you've been struggling with the FBI background check stuff, and I imagine that the language there is related to that and trying to get it to be more conforming to the FBI's requirements. But I think what I see there is now every shareholder in an LLC is going to be deemed a principal, even if they're a very small, silent, non-controlling shareholder. And that would require them to get fingerprinted because every shareholder in an LLC is called a member. And that's what the language now says in that Senate proposal. If we're going to be going down a path of using a third-party provider, and you're going to require every LLC shareholder to be fingerprinted, I worry that might get pretty expensive and kind of unnecessary since the statute doesn't otherwise really require you to do that full background check on every shareholder, really only on shareholders who control and people who have a significant managerial role in the company. So just kind of laying that out for you as an area of potential concern. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. And yeah, you're right about 1.4.4a. That is waived for Tier 1 cultivators. Anyone else that would like to make a public comment that joined via the link, the video link, just raise your virtual hand. And if you join via phone and like to make a public comment, you can hit *6 to unmute yourself.
We have Jason Gulisano.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for today's meeting. It's pretty informative, even though I missed half of it and I got lost online. I just had one question about maybe an example of a contingency plan for a tier 1 or a tier 1 manufacturer. As far as a contingency plan, if it's a quick shutdown or an unfortunate circumstances you have to close down. That was just one thing when filling out the application would maybe be helpful. And as far as really agreeing with tier 1 manufacturing being such a small operation, it probably would make sense. And I appreciate you guys speaking about all these things online. And have a good day. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. So again, just feel free to raise your virtual hand or hit *6 to unmute yourself.
Ben Fisher is next.
Hey, thanks everybody for everything as always. I am just a little curious as to the prioritization of these pre-qualification applications. I understand that tier 1 and small cultivators have a priority, but does that mean that say a tier 2 or 3 cultivator that has a finished application before somebody else on a tier 1 are tier 1 applications that have been submitted after larger tier applications, are they being prioritized? I understand if it's applications submitted on the same day, but I'm not 100% sure it seems fair to the higher tier applicants that they'll just keep getting pushed back in line every time a smaller tier puts in an application. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Any other public comments, either from folks on the phone or folks that joined via the link? Okay. I'll close the public comment window then, and I think the contingency plan. Hello?
Hello? Yes, sorry, I pushed the wrong button. I missed just before you closed off. Thanks again. Here's my question. It's a question, not really a comment. What is the escrow amount required as an insurance alternative for tier 1 cultivator?
Okay, thanks for the comment. I think you can find that in 2.2.2.
Okay.
Read the rules.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right. Any last public comments before we close? All right. Well, thank you for the kind of questions and comments today. We do take them into account. I can just say very briefly that the contingency plan, what we're really looking for is how are you going to deal with kind of securing your inventory, securing, any sort of cannabis or, anything that you need that, anything that we need as a board to make sure that that product doesn't end up on the illicit market, that you can wind down your company in a way that ensures kind of just general compliance with the federal government and just public health and public safety here in Vermont. So that's the kind of purpose of a cessation plan. Other than that, I don't see anything else on our agenda. Julie or Kyle or Brent or David, is there anything else you want to raise before we adjourn?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, then I will adjourn this meeting. We'll be back next week on Monday. Really appreciate everyone joining today and for kind of bearing with us. And we'll see you all next week.
Adios. Safe travels back, Julie.